Botsman and Roo, the author of What's Mine is Yours, The Rise of Collaborative Consumption. When I got the blurb for this book, I was really excited. Then I saw Rachel's TED Talk, and I was even more excited. She was a fantastic speaker there, and I expected her to be a fantastic speaker. Then I read the book. Loved the book. In fact, I've been evangelizing to everybody on my Facebook page, on my Buzz, talking to my friends in person. My friend's 14-year-old kid was super glad to hear about Share.com because he's now getting full value for his video games as opposed to half at GameStop. So I think you're going to find these ideas super interesting both personally and professionally. I think you'll know about some of these companies, and I think you're going to find some new companies you haven't heard of that will be useful to you. But I think the book is more than just something that's interesting to us personally, professionally. It's also a different way of thinking about the world. And it's a way that I think we can get past some of the kind of roadblocks we've got on public discussions. Because, I mean, think about it. Sharing for fun and profit. What could be more socialist or more capitalist? So it's a chance to transcend old problems. Please welcome Rachel and Roo.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us today. So I'm going to talk to you about the rise of collaborative consumption, and Roo and myself have been doing interviews for the last couple of weeks, and the most popular question is this a reaction to the recession? So today I'd like to talk to you about why this isn't a reactionary blip to the recession, but a fundamental change in the relationship between producers and consumers, and the beginning of what we think is a revolution in identity and ownership that could become as big as the Industrial Revolution or even the information age. So today we thought our focus would actually be on technology and how technology enables trust between strangers and how this is reinventing sectors from retail to banking to food, creating massive white spaces of opportunity. So to get started, I thought I would start with an example you'll all be very familiar with, which we call the godfather of collaborative consumption, which is eBay. Now, there is a popular Silicon Valley legend that eBay started when Pierre Omidyar wanted to help his girlfriend sell and collect Pez dispensers. This is, in fact, a myth made up by a PR whiz. The real story, it is Murphy's Law today. The real story is that Pierre actually put this broken laser pointer up for auction on his personal website as an experiment. And he was even astonished within 24 hours when a bid came in for $14.83. So he contacted the winning bidder to make sure that he knew it was broken. And the guy wrote back and said, "I'm a collector of broken laser pointers." Now, it was in this moment that Pierre knew that he'd hit on something really big for two reasons. One, he realized that there was actually a massive opportunity to redistribute things that were unwanted or worthless to one person, and then secondly, that had an immediate value to someone else. And what he also realized was that the internet had created this massive matchmaking machine with the power to match person A's haves with person C's wants with whatever they may be. So no longer was the coincidence of wants a problem. So in other words, the internet had created the efficiency and access for us to trade peer-to-peer. But it also did something critical for eBay and also for collaborative consumption, was that it created the social lubricant or trust. In other words, we now have the technology to create trust between strangers. Now, my grandma, who the book is dedicated to, is very fascinated by this subject of collaborative consumption. And it's funny because she really gets sort of the heart of the book. She really gets the community aspect, although she gets a little lost when I start talking about real-time technologies and augmented reality. So anyway, I was last back in London, and she asked me to show her the power of this matchmaking. So I went onto eBay, and I said to her, "What do you want?" And she said, "I want a pearl silver-rimmed picture frame for your wedding photo." So online I went and found one within 2 seconds. And so the seller was called Moo Cow Meadows. So she said, well, how can I trust someone called Moo Cow Meadows? And I said, well, you just do. And then she said, well, I'm going to pay for it, and I can't actually physically inspect the item. And I said, yes. And then she said, and then we're going to pay for it before it's actually shipped. And I said, yes. She said, well, how do I trust this person? So then I started to explain to her, well, 98% of trades on eBay receive a positive rating, and the 2% negative rating is for relatively minor reasons, like the item arrives 1 week later than expected. Okay, she says, let's order the item. So we then got into this conversation about reputation systems, right? Now, eBay has proven something incredibly powerful, which is that the trust we form face-to-face can now be replicated online through points, feedback, power sellers. And Roo and I noticed that these two principles that eBay had proven on steroids, trust and efficiency, were enabling us to mimic the exchanges that used to take place in villages, but in ways and on a scale that had never been possible before. So in other words, technology was actually taking us back to really old market behaviors. So we're swapping and sharing and bartering and trading, but they're being reinvented into cool and dynamic forms that are relevant for the Facebook age. We call this groundswell collaborative consumption, and we believe it's a new culture and economy that's reinventing not just what we consume, but how we consume. So a few years ago, we started to notice the massive surgence in car sharing and bike sharing and peer-to-peer rental markets and Etsy labs and food co-ops, and we started to wonder whether all these things were linked and interconnected. And what we believe is that we are sharing and collaborating again in ways that are actually more hip than hippie. And sort of keeping up with the Joneses is being replaced by sharing with the Joneses. I was reading the New York Times. I like to go back and look at articles that really influenced me. And there was a great quote where it said, sharing is the iPod. What the 8-track is, sharing is the iPod. Sharing is to ownership what the iPod is to the 8-track, what the solar panel is to the coal mine. In other words, sharing is postmodern and cool, and ownership is becoming dull and backwards. Now, when we started writing the book, we had around 500 examples of collaborative consumption, and now we actually have over 5,000 from all corners of the world. And as we dug deeper, we actually realized that they could be organized into 3 clear systems. So the first is called redistribution markets. So to tell you the power of redistribution markets, about 4 years ago, I bought a bread making machine. Now, hands up here, it's predominantly men, but maybe some of you know Nigella Lawson. Does anyone know? Yes, Nigella Bites, right. So Nigella often appears on the TV screen looking like this. It's the middle of the night, right, and she feels like making cakes, and there she appears fully made up, and she's become somewhat of this domestic goddess, right. So at the time, I was doing a lot of traveling, and I happened to be on a plane where Nigella declared that, every woman needed a bread-making machine to fill a home with these warm and comforting smells of freshly baked bread. And I thought, wow, this is all I needed to be a domestic goddess. So I bought this bread-making machine. Now, bread-making machines are huge. I don't know if you've seen them, but they actually occupy probably half of a New York kitchen. And I used this bread-making machine just once. But the weird thing was, I actually felt this strange sense of relief when I finally got rid of the thing. I had fallen into the common consumer trap of buying not what I needed, but what I thought I needed, or what I desired, or what I thought I should be. I was trying to keep up with the Joneses. Now, this problem is huge. Consumerism has actually become all-consuming. And I want to give you a couple of stats that support this point. Our houses are stuffed with ice cream makers, electronic gadgets, foot spas, chocolate fondue fountains, and my latest spotting, a strawberry slicer. I mean, was life complete before the strawberry slicer came along? So 80% of the stuff we own, we use less than once a month. Just think about that. 80% of the stuff you own, you use less than once a month. The second thing is that there are actually 53,000 personal self-storage units in the United States alone. That's 7 times the amount of Starbucks. Now this is crazy. Like, we don't have enough room in our houses for all this stuff, so we start renting and paying for self-storage units. And when you think about it, waste and storage are two endgames of the same problem. We have too much stuff. And this is where redistribution markets come in. You've got examples like FreeCycle, where people give stuff away. You've got examples like swap.com that Daniel mentioned, or ThreadUp, a kids' clothing exchange, where people are exchanging things for equal value. And then, of course, you've got reuse marketplaces where people are actually making money. eBay actually just estimated that the estimated worth of the secondary goods market is $500 billion. So it's a huge white space of opportunity. Redistribution markets also have massive environmental benefits because reduce, reuse, recycle, repair, redistribute, what they're doing is stretching the life cycle of a product. In other words, they reduce the amount of stuff that end up in landfill. The second system is what we call collaborative lifestyles. So hands up how many of you have heard of co-working or social lending or peer-to-peer travel? Most of you, right? Okay, these are all examples of collaborative lifestyles because it's not just stuff that can be shared, it's spaces, parking spaces, gardens, time, skills, assets that are intangible. And the reason why it's so easy to share this stuff is because we've wired our world to share. And we can share within our neighborhoods, our offices, or our Facebook network. So to give you two examples of collaborative lifestyles that I personally really like, the first is social lending. Now, the easiest way to explain social lending is Roo has $100 to lend, and I want to borrow $100, and it matches us together, although it doesn't have to be a direct exchange. And there's some huge marketplaces emerging like Zopa in the UK and Lending Club in the US. Now, social lending increased by 800% last year. Now, I can't think of a traditional bank that increased by 800%. Now, Lending Club did around $11 million worth of loans last year, and they're expected to become 10% of the personal loans market. So if I was someone like Bank of America or Commonwealth Bank, I'd start to getting worried about social lending, that they were actually going to start eating into our margins. But the thing that's so fascinating about social lending is that the default rate is really low at 0.64%. Now, credit cards are around 8%, and the traditional bank is around 5%. Now, in our research, we discovered that the reason why it is so low is that people said, I trust my peer. I feel more accountable to my peer than I do with any kind of big bank, which is really interesting. The second is another example of a collaborative lifestyle is called Landshare in the UK. Now, Landshare, there's similar ones in the US called Sharing Backyards or SharedEarth.com. It's like a garden dating agency. So what it does is it takes Mr. Jones with some spare back garden space and Mrs. Smith, a would-be grower, and it matches them. And together, they grow their own food. There's been over 55,000 matches in the UK so far, and it's one of those ideas that's so simple, yet brilliant, you wonder why it's never been done before. My dad is actually participating in Landshare, and the funny thing is it's actually not about the food, right? He has all these kids come around to his neighborhood and grow tomatoes, and for the first time in 18 years that he's lived in Hampstead Garden suburb, he actually knows his neighbors' names. So I think it's really interesting that what's happening is it's part of this OTO, online to offline trend where people are forming a connection through technology that leads to very powerful community and human relationships in the real world. The last system is what we call product service systems. Okay, so if any of you have been to London or Washington or Denver or Minneapolis or Paris recently, you've probably seen a lot of people cycling around on bikes. But they're not on their own bikes, they're on magic bikes that are there when you want them and gone when you don't. Now, bike sharing is actually the fastest growing form of transportation in the world. And it's a great example of a product service system, whereby you pay for the benefit of a product, what it does for you, without needing to own the product outright. Now, product service systems are absolutely ideal when products have what we call high idling capacity. So high idling capacity refers to the unused or untapped value of a good. So a car that sits idle for 23 hours a day, the evening dress that you wear once and that sits in your wardrobe has high idling capacity. Now, one of my favorite metaphors for this is, who owns a power drill? Well, a lot of men, so around 80% of the room own a power drill. Actually, half of all households in the US own a power drill. Now, that power drill will be used between 12 to 13 minutes in its entire lifetime. Now, when you think about it, it's really crazy. You're laughing, but it is crazy because what you need is the hole, not actually the drill. And that's a great example of a shift in mindset about a whole generation of people growing up saying, hang on a minute, I want the benefit of that product and I can access that through different ways. Peer-to-peer rental, such as Zilok, is a great example. Now, product service systems have actually been around for years. Just think of libraries or laundrettes. But we believe that they're entering a new era of supercharged appeal for two reasons. One, we now have the technology to make sharing frictionless, convenient, and fun. And two, our relationship to satisfying what we want is far less material than any previous generation. I don't want CDs. I want the music it plays. I don't want videos. I want the movie it carries. I don't want an answering machine. I want the message it saves. In other words, we don't want stuff. We want the needs or experiences it fulfills. So we're entering an era where access is better than ownership, as Kevin Kelly puts it, or where usage trumps possessions. Now, these three systems are fusing together and creating a dotted line between what's mine, what's yours, and what's ours. I thought you guys might actually appreciate that there's someone in Parsons, it's a magic thing is starting to happen around collaborative consumption where it's becoming a movement, which was always our intent. And we get sent all these wonderful things from all around the world of people making videos. Someone sent me a jewelry collection that she's made inspired by the things that we're saying, which is a little weird but lovely as well. And some students at Parsons have actually started to use Google Maps to map all the examples of collaborative consumption by the systems in New York City. So I'll send this link to you, but it's pretty cool, the things that they're starting to do. And this student actually wants to open it up to the rest of the world to create a world map of collaborative consumption examples. So, how big is this thing? Is it a niche, or is it a trend, or is it really a groundswell that we talk about? So we've made this little video that's going to load and work to show you just how big it really is. And hopefully it will work. That's pretty big and still in its nascent stages. So just like to now talk about why we think it's emerging now. And I hate this word because it's cliche, but it's actually a perfect storm of 4 key drivers. Now, the first is 2 big global contextual factors: pressing unresolved environmental concerns and a global recession that has fundamentally shocked consumer behaviors. Now, I don't like to talk about it being frugal because I think what's actually happening is that we are seeing a questioning of the health of the consumer system in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, you look at the number of articles coming out around happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction. This is all connected to, does consumerism make us happy? Thomas Friedman, who is one of my favorite columnists, wrote something which I thought summed it up nicely. He said 2008 was when we hit a wall, when Mother Nature and the market both said no more. Now, we know that a system that's based on selling more and more stuff is an environmental and economic Ponzi scheme. Yet it's really difficult for us to figure out what we individually should do. Now, our hypothesis is that as the consumer system got bigger, it pushed us further and further apart. But now that it broke, it's actually snapped and is pushing us back together. All around us, we're seeing a resurgence of the belief in community, both in the virtual and real worlds. You know, volunteering rates are through the roof, bike sales have never been higher, cooking and sewing classes are doing a roaring trade. And as you saw in that video, there's now 1,000 more farmers markets than there are Walmarts in the United States. Now, Facebook recently hit 500 million users. And we actually think that Facebook and farmers markets have a lot in common with each other, because all around us we're seeking to be a part of communities of people with shared interest. We're working to feed our social self, the side of us that seeks connection and belonging. We've gotten really good at consuming, buying and consuming more. But we were actually born and bred to share and cooperate, and we were doing so for thousands of years, whether we hunted in packs or farmed in cooperatives. But now sharing is back, you know, with this ubiquitous force that we call the peer-to-peer revolution. And we're growing up sharing files and videos and knowledge, and now these behaviors are extending into other areas of our lives. And this is driving a massive cultural shift from Generation Me to Generation We. You know, Clay Shirky, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and you should read his book, Cognitive Surplus, he put it brilliantly when he said, we're monkeys with internet access. You know, I think it's happening so fast because these behaviors are very innate to us. But now we have the infrastructure to share and collaborate on ways that have never been possible before. So these 4 drivers are fusing together to create the big shift away from the 20th century defined by hyperconsumption towards the 21st century, an era of collaborative consumption. We believe it's a new era of consumerism defined by access over ownership, the primacy of experience over more stuff, and trust between strangers. So just to wrap, I want to come back to the cornerstone of this new cultural economy, which is trust or reputation. Because it doesn't matter if you're sharing your car, sharing your back garden, or swapping a good. They all involve different degrees of trust. And the way we look at it is that it actually can be put out on a spectrum. So you've got companies emerging that actually evolve around this centralized trust system. So Zipcar is a great example of this. Zipcar still controls an inventory of cars. So it's a fairly controlled system of trust. You've then got a whole breed of marketplaces which are sort of enabling trust between strangers. So swap.com is a great example of that, where you're trading peer-to-peer, but you still feel the presence of the company. And then you've got really open systems of trust, where it truly is peer-placed and the organization or the company completely disappears. So Couchsurfing is a great example of that, or FreeCycle, or even Craigslist. That's really Craig Newmark's intent. And it's so fascinating how this principle of trust between strangers is changing marketplaces. Now, how many of you would hitchhike? 0, maybe, 1, maybe. Not recently, right? Okay. So What about, would you share a ride with someone from your old college? Hands up. Yeah. What about someone from this room? Someone you work with? Everyone, right? So the circle of trust, your relationship to hitchhiking changes when it becomes ride sharing. Now, what Zimride does is its integration with Facebook means that it can change your relationship to the person that you're sharing a car with. So it does the usual things by saying, which university you went to or which workplace you belong to, but then it actually gets into personal preferences that enables you to figure out who's going to be in the car. Do they smoke? Are they a chatterbox? What do they listen to on the radio? Do they like to eat in the car? So what these systems are actually doing is helping you get a very complete picture of not just whether you can trust this person, but also whether you'd like to share a ride with them as well. And so what's happening here is it's actually community plus technology totally reinventing a very old idea of carpooling. The other example that we love is called ThreadUp that I mentioned, which is the clothing exchange for kids' clothing. By the time a child reaches 18, it's estimated that we would have spent $20,000 on kids' clothes and retired 3,000 items. Now, anyone who has a child knows that they grow out of them every 3 months, so the clothes are actually pretty new. Now, what ThreadUp realized was that the problem with most used clothes marketplaces is that mums and dads are very worried about cleanliness and quality. They will swap stuff if they believe that stuff is going to be clean and high quality. So what they're doing is actually using reputation systems, and this may look actually a little bit like Foursquare and badges, to reinforce the behaviors that they're looking for. And I see things like this as a nice example of competitive collaboration, where you want to be top of the leaderboard, so it motivates the good behaviors. Now, what happens on ThreadUp is if you start to reach the most stylish or the super swapper, you can actually start trading in better currencies. And this is a really great example of where reputation is starting to become a currency. We actually believe that reputation could become more powerful than your credit history. And it's only a matter of time before the reputation trail that we leave across communities, both in YouTube and Flickr and also in the examples that we have shown, will be aggregated to form a score that will determine your access to these communities. So, just to wrap, this is a nice way of summarizing what we've been talking about. We believe that if the 20th century was defined by credit and advertising and individual ownership and was called hyperconsumption, the 21st century will be defined by reputation, community, and shared access, and will be called collaborative consumption. It's funny, consumerism seems like an immovable fact of life, but it's not. It's actually a very new modern construct that was actually just invented in the last 60 to 70 years. And we actually believe that we're at a turning point, and that we'll see this period as a time when society started to wake up from this humongous hangover of emptiness and waste and started to reinvent the meaning of more. And we're so excited by collaborative consumption, not just from a social and environmental perspective, but also from a business perspective, because we now believe that we have the technologies to reinvent outdated modes of business, leapfrog over wasteful forms of consumerism, and help us lead healthier and more fulfilling lives. Thank you very much.